Okay. Maybe I should say, to sort of go off script a little bit, that there are differences between acting, like theatre, where you play a character on a stage to an audience, and performance art, where an artist performs. It could be on a stage and it could be in character, but there are differences, although maybe our colleagues in drama and theatre will point to more kind of avant-garde types of theatre that bleed over. Now, part of the interesting counter alternative art history that we are looking at here is that Claire Bishop claims that modern forms of performance arts, participatory art and so on, owe as much to history of theatre as they do to the history of fine arts. And that's contested. Some people say no, they don't come from a theatre background. But I think Bishop's right, which is why I'm kind of citing her. So there's the actor on the stage, there's the performance artist on the stage, and there are also other types of arts that do use the human body, that do use people, that, but they don't perform in the same way that a performance artist performs. So we might think typically, and there are always exceptions to these, and they do bleed from one into the other, but typically you have in performance art, it's the artist himself or herself who performs. But there are other forms of that, of participatory arts, where maybe the artist isn't even there at all. And we saw that last week with the happenings, where perhaps Alan Capro or somebody else, who else do we look at? Jean-Jacques Lebel, Klaus Oldenburg, and so on. They could set up a situation where something happens, where the audience participates. As an art form, and that was new, invented in the kind of 1950s. And that's not strictly the same as performance arts, and it's certainly not what you would expect in the theatre. But there is another art movement. So Alan Capro belongs to the Fluxus art movement. And there is another art movement that we're going to look at today, starting this here with constructing situations. And about 30 seconds ago, I pushed the slide advance button and nothing's happened. So I'm going to try clicking on it there. Okay. So the Situationist International, in its first phase, from 1957 to 1962, came out of another art movement in France called the Lettrist International. When I say in France, the name International is a bit of a giveaway that it wasn't just French. It was also in Denmark and Italy. But it did have branches across Europe. These artists worked in film, collage, discussions, writing. So I'm kind of going back to Bailey's comment there. These should be setting off light bulbs in your head, going, what, like the Bureau, the Surrealist, the Bureau of Surrealist Research, like Dada Cabaret, like Futurist Serrata. I mean, this is all Claire Bishop's argument, really, in Artificial Hells. Agrees with her that these forms of art come from Dada, Futurism, and Surrealism. But if you remember back to before the lecture series, before you knew about Serrata, Dada Cabaret, and the Bureau of Surrealist Research, maybe you thought of Surrealism as Salvador Dali. Maybe you thought of Futurism as Boccioni paintings and sculptures. Maybe you thought of Dada as Marcel Duchamp's paintings and urinal, but maybe you weren't thinking about these performative, participatory elements. So we've learned something from Bishop and Gross in that sense. Now, the general tenets of the Situationists were as follows. They were critical of capitalist exploitation and what they saw as the abasement of human life. And they wanted to promote an alternative life or alternative life experiences. And they wanted to do that through, and I'm going to list a load of key terms here, but I'm going to explain them later on in the lecture. They wanted to do this, propose new ways of living, imagine new ways of living by constructing situations. That's what they called it. Very similar in some ways to happenings. And also they wanted through a union of play, personal freedom, and critical thinking. And there's some other things, I'm going to leave them for later. They published a newspaper, the International Situationist, which I've got a quote from on screen. And it says, there can be no situationist painting or music, but only a situationist use of these means. So it's an art movement that might use painting, but they're not going to make paintings in the traditional sense. They're going to construct situations. And if we think back to happenings, Capro was doing something similar, wasn't he? Where he would have a kind of party happening, event, perhaps where people are painting live, maybe on see-through cellophane and so on. So painting itself becomes, it transcends the canvas, it becomes an act. So here are some concrete examples of what the Situationists actually did by using painting. So in this first phase, they've got a closer link to art. They have shows in galleries. Asger Jorn, for example, had a famous show in 1959 where he did paintings on top of other paintings. The concept of defiguring or defacing, of course, it already existed. And here it has a clearly political statement, intent. This is perhaps the essential or most important fingerprint of the Situationist International in general, a growing dissatisfaction with and dissent against established structures of authority, including established art hierarchies. And this is a sentiment that comes to a head in May 1968 with riots in Paris and the counterculture movement, which I mentioned last week. So we could imagine the Situationist International as a seed, something that grows into or part of this cultural revolution, and it certainly supported it and gave it structure. Defacing paintings. Now, this is not by the Situationist International. This is from 2003. It's the Chapman brothers, which I think you might be familiar with. They're mega famous YBA artists. YBA means Young British Artists. They're not so young anymore, but in the mid-1990s they were, when they kind of broke onto the art scene at the same time as people like Damien Hirst and Tracy Emin. They called these rectified Goyas. Quote, "We always had the intention of rectifying it, to take that nice word from The Shining," that's the film The Shining, when the butler's trying to encourage Jack Nicholson to kill his family, to rectify the situation. That's Jake Chapman. They are influenced quite a lot by horror movies. Quote, "So we've gone very systematically through the entire 80 etchings," continues Dinos, his brother, "and changed all the visible victims' heads into clowns' heads and puppies' heads." So in case you don't know what's going on here, the Chapman brothers have bought real etchings, real artworks by Goya, who's a famous artist from the Romantic period, Spanish one, around about the time of the Napoleonic Wars. He paints the Napoleonic Wars and here does them in etchings. And the Chapman brothers have bought them and actually defaced them. They've painted on top of them. Is that disrespectful? Is it sacrilegious? Well, yes, they're not showing reverence and respect for sacred artworks, but they might point to the fact that their value has actually gone up since they painted on them. Not entirely their thing. So graffiti artist Deface doing the same thing, where he paints onto a £10 note there. And later, the Chapman brothers did the same thing at the Frieze Art Fair in 2007. It's illegal to deface the Queen's face on a banknote, but their banknotes are worth a lot more than £20 now. So if you took one over and got them to paint on it, it would raise the value of your £50 note because you would now have an artwork. This is a lesser known Situationist artist. The first artist that we've looked at was called Asger Jorn. He's Danish and he did the defacing paintings. But here we're looking at an Italian called Pino Galizio, who makes these industrial paintings. It's a comment about consumerism and the commodification of art, because he makes paintings on huge rolls of paper like this, rolls them up, and then sells them by the meter. So you have a meter of that, like you can buy wallpaper or something. So it's mocking the kind of sacred, what they might see as pretentious notion of art by either defacing it or selling it by the meter. They had a second phase from about 62 to 72. And here they've moved really away from art. They want to abolish art as a separate category. But incorporate creativity into all aspects of art. Guy Debord was the leader of the Situationist International, a Frenchman. And he was actually against the subordination of art to politics. He doesn't think that art should be lesser than politics. But he wanted to surpass both art and politics by realizing the avant-garde, read Dada, Futurist and Surrealist, integration of art and life. So in a way, he is for the subordination of art to life. He thought that art should be renounced, but in order to make everyday life rich and thrilling. The Situationist analysis of the happening movement was contemptuous. They didn't like it. They claimed that the proponents of happenings, like Alan Capro, had stolen their ideas and made them more boring. The Situationist International believed that happenings forced people to participate in a cultural and ideological vacuum. Now, what does that mean? I guess what they're saying is, by the fact that they maybe scored the happenings, invited people in and got them to do things in galleries, they're saying this doesn't really have much effect on the real world. Yet, like happenings, the constructed situations after which the Situationist International are named, they opposed non-intervention and alienation. Artistically, they had a lot in common. That's according to Claire Bishop. They denounced happenings, but they didn't mention some of the more extreme cases of happenings. They apparently only knew about Jean-Jacques Le Bel through media reports. And this is really ironic because the most famous book published by the Situationist International is called the Society of the Spectacle. The main theory of that book is that they were saying that society is not really experiencing life anymore and is only experiencing it through the media. So you've got to imagine this is a time when the late 50s into the 1960s. The book wasn't written until 67 or published in 67. This is a time when people were getting televisions in their house for the first time. Most people before that didn't have their own TVs. So they thought that everyone's just experiencing it secondhand through television and other media reports. And yet it looks as though they didn't actually go to the happenings that they were criticising. Anyway, so what's their problem with happenings? One, that it's in a gallery and not out on the streets and not having an effect on real life, not having not having political effectiveness or actually changing life in any way. But Du Bois criticised happenings. He saw them in the same light as kind of team projects in capitalism. The creation of what he called a spectacular pseudo-culture that reflected capitalism's recapture of the worker as the personality well integrated into the group. It is the same project everywhere, a restructuring of our community, he said, in Society of the Spectacle. He criticised the exclusionary anti-spectacular spectacle, as he called it, as restricted to actors alone, comparing them to the professional revolutionaries of Leninism. His colleague, the Belgian artist Raoul Vannegut, in examining its participatory ethos, saw that the ultimate logic of the happening and its derivatives, things related to it, is to supply the society of masterless slaves which the cyberneticians have planned for us with the spectatorless spectacle that it will require. Both these, I'm sort of quoting from two books here, Society of the Spectacle, written by Guy Debord, and The Revolution of Everyday Life by Raoul Vannegut. And they use quite flowery language. They're quite artistic books. They're written by artists. But I think Du Bois might have a point here. You know, we're beginning to see office cultures. Well, maybe it's very early when he writes it, but it's now commonplace, isn't it, to do like some sort of team building exercise where we will go and do paintballing or something like that. And Du Bois says the happenings, they're just like that. It's not anti-capitalist enough for the situationists who are Marxists. So let's do a little side-by-side comparison between Jean-Jacques Le Bel's happenings and Guy Debord's notion of the constructed situation. We might consider Le Bel's happenings as an anarchist model with a heightened experience through sex and drugs and part of the counterculture movement. He was trying to insert everyday life into art. He still keeps art as a separate category, but it's expanded to include participants. And he's concerned with getting publics to engage with it. On the other column, we have a Marxist model, which is all about a resistance to spectacle, to capitalist participatory models, to experiencing everything through the media. It aims not to insert everyday life into art, but to insert art into everyday life. They use the word to sublate, which means consume, I suppose, like, yeah, to consume it within everyday life, swallow it up. It dissolves art to make life more artistically fulfilling. And rather than getting people to engage, they are more concerned with leading by example. They wrote a document called the Report on Construction of Situations in their founding manifesto. The pamphlet, published by de Boer in 1957, clearly expresses that their main aim is revolutionary. The most general goal, quote, this is a quote, the most general goal must be to expand the non-mediocre part of life, to reduce the empty moments of life as much as possible. It is easy to see how much the very principle of the spectacle, non-intervention, is linked to the alienation of the old world. The Situationist International had an aversion to documentation, and this was a deliberate play to avoid imitation or the reification of art. Now, the reification is a Marxist term used by Karl Marx, and it means to turn something into something immaterial into something material. So they're talking about, constructing situations that the performance is the thing. If you say the performance, that's not the right word, but the situation is the artwork, not the photo of it. Don't fetishize the photo. Don't, you don't need that. Use your imagination. You're either going to learn something from this or you're not. Here is a definition of the constructed situation from the Situationist International in 1958. They called it a moment of life concretely and deliberately constructed by the collective organisation of a unitary ambience and a game of events. The thing that we're going to take from that is that they are in control and constructing a situation. They're not just asking people to participate. And a bigger quote here, our central idea is the construction of situations. So very clearly there, Guy Debord, the leader of the Situationist International, is placing the construction of situations as the main thing, the most important thing that they do. That is to say, the concrete construction of momentary ambiances of life and their transformation into superior passional quality. We must develop a systematic intervention based on the complex factors of two components in perceptual interaction: the material environment of life and the behaviours which that environment gives rise to and which radically transform it. The most general goal must be to expand the non-mediocre part of life and reduce the empty moments of life wherever possible. The situation is thus designed to be lived by its constructors. The role played by a passive or merely bit part playing public must constantly diminish, get smaller, while that played of those who cannot be called actors, but rather, in a new sense of the term, livers, must be steadily increased. And also with the documentation element, they're saying quite clearly here that their situations will be ephemeral, without a future. That means they'll come and then they'll go, they'll fade. Our only concern is real life. We care nothing about the permanence of art or anything else. So we mentioned last week, didn't we, the general strike, the student uprising, the Renault factory workers joining them. Well, the Situationist International were very much involved in that. So when they make claims to being a revolutionary art movement, they're not joking. Things got really heated, and it did look as if it was possible that France was going to have a revolution for at least for a short time. And some people would say it did have a revolution, but it was a cultural revolution. Debord discussed the close link between revolution and culture in everyday life. And the reason why conservative powers are interested in forbidding them any direct access to the rigged game of official culture as he saw it. Du Bois recalls that worldwide revolutionary moments that emerged in the 1920s were followed by an ebbing of those movements, and that tried to advance a liberatory new attitude in culture and everyday life. And as such, movements were brought to a complete social isolation. So, what I should say is that the Situationist International started distributing pamphlets in universities. There are two main universities that are associated with the uprising, both in Paris. One is called the Sorbonne. The Sorbonne is maybe France's most famous university. It's an old one, and they were starting to work in one called Nanterre, which was a more modern university building, like a campus university style one. They started agitating there, and then they moved over to take over the print room at the École des Beaux-Arts, the art school, where they started to print hundreds of posters, which they distributed all over Paris, that had weird slogans on them that were, quite enigmatic and funny. They also graffitied all over Paris. So situationist graffiti and slogans became emblematic of the uprising. One of them was, it translates as something like, under the streets or under the cobblestones, the beach, in which they're kind of got this romantic notion that you can pick up the cobblestones, hurl them at the police or anyone trying to stop the revolution, but at the same time underneath it is nature. So we can tear up the streets, overthrow the government, and we have nature. Under the streets, the beach, or beneath the streets, the beach is another common translation of that slogan. They said, there is a notable progression from futurism through Dadaism and Surrealism to the movements formed after 1945. At each of these stages, however, one discovers the same desire for total change and the same rapid disintegration when the inability to change the real world, profoundly enough, leads to a defensive withdrawal to the very doctrinal positions whose adequacy had just been revealed. So they are directly claiming to be descendants of those early avant-garde movements. But what were their situations then, if not happenings? They worked with the concept of the dérive, a mode of experimental behaviour linked to the conditions of urban society, a technique of rapid passage through varied ambiances. The term also designates a specific uninterrupted period of deriving. Now, that means nothing to you, I'm sure, but it's based really on a kind of bourgeois notion of the dandy, like Oscar Wilde or someone with a feather in his hat, who, being rich and bourgeois, didn't have to work and were able to spend a lot of time in cafes and wander around the city, just wandering. They called it flaneuring. And as I see it, flaneuring and the dérive are very similar. So it's about wandering through the city, but in a conscious way and kind of trying to take it in, see it in a different way. Why? Well, because usually we don't do that. We just, get up, go to work, rush there, and so on. And we don't spend time wandering, discovering, maybe using different routes through the city, not the most direct way, and so on. Noticing your surroundings. There was this beautiful project in Washington, DC not too long ago, where they got a world famous violinist who had sold out the opera house or whatever it was there, tickets going for over $100 per seat. And they put him in the underground to busk, to monitor whether people recognized that they are listening to one of the world's greatest violinists playing one of the most complicated, difficult, and considered to be best pieces of classical music composed for violin, or whether they'll just rush past and go to work because they're too busy. How much value do we put on art? If you had to get to work and you're busy, but you heard something amazing, would you stop and listen? I find that interesting. And then, so there's the dérive and there's the détournement. We use the word, it's the French word, but we use it in English. Short for détournement of pre-existing aesthetic elements. Think back to defacing paintings, it's basically that. The integration of present or past artistic productions into a superior construction of a milieu. In this sense, this is important, there can be no situationist painting or music, but just the situationist use of their means. In a more elementary sense, détournement within the old cultural spheres is a method of propaganda, a method which reveals the wearing out and loss of importance of those spheres. So détournement, well, we're going to go into that. We'll give you some more concrete understandings of détournement, but first we need to understand the situationist concept of recuperation, which we'll do on the slide after this one. There's more types of situation, very closely linked to the dérive is the notion of psychogeography. Psychogeography is the study of specific effects of a geographical environment on the emotions and behavior of individuals. So when you're deriving through a city, that they're interested in, they're looking at the effects of architecture, town planning, layouts, and so on, how it might control individuals, how it might control the flow of individuals, how it might make you compliant with a government, and so on. Or just how it makes you feel. You feel differently, I promise you, you feel differently when surrounded by skyscrapers than when you're next to a flat lake. And unitary urbanism is theory of the combined use of arts and techniques as a means contributing to the construction of this unified milieu in a dynamic relation with experiments in behaviour. We're not really going to look at that in this lecture. So, détournement and recuperation. We've looked at defacing paintings, but also they deface slogans and logos with graffiti, for example, and they're trying to turn them against their original intention or meaning. So if the meaning of an advert is to sell something, they're going to subvert it and make a political statement. And the reason that they do that is they see, my PowerPoint's just crashed a minute, I think. Well, I'll keep talking. I don't know if you can see the slide. I can't. It's a screen whirring at the moment. But they see the fact that things recuperated. Another word for recuperation in their sense could be institutionalization or co-opting. So I'm hoping that you will understand one of those words. To co-opt something means to, what does it mean? It means to take something and use it for another purpose. So the images that I prepared for you that were on screen a second ago were of two kinds. One was on the right-hand side was a Che Guevara T-shirt, which is extremely ironic that you can buy a Che Guevara T-shirt, because Che Guevara was a Cuban revolutionary Marxist. No, he wasn't. He was an Argentinian revolutionary Marxist who was instrumental in the Cuban Revolution. He's associated with Cuba, but he was actually Argentinian. And he, overthrew the government there, along with Fidel Castro and other Cuban revolutionaries, and instituted or installed a Marxist communist government. And he was completely against commodification. He had a job there as head of the National Bank for a bit, I think it was that, but he left to go and fight more revolutions around the world, and he died fighting in Bolivia. But now you can buy a Che Guevara T-shirt. And the point here is, I think the Situationist International would make, is that it's not revolutionary to buy a T-shirt of a revolutionary, because what you're actually doing is giving money to a capitalist T-shirt manufacturer. I doubt that the proceeds go to funding a communist revolution. It's just money off of you. I get adverts on Facebook for Christmas jumpers that have communist themes in them, and one of them's called the Communist Party, but the party is with party hats on and stuff. And it's got pictures of Karl Marx, Lenin, Chairman Mao, and other famous communists. And I kind of find that funny, and I thought, yeah, I'd like to buy that, but then it sort of dawns on me that that's just recuperating, or co-opting, but recuperating in the Situationist language, the revolutionary potential of something and turning it into a commodity. And they would be completely against it, as all Marxists would. Now, the other image that I had on screen was the BP logo. So I'm sorry if you can't see it. Yeah, my computer's completely frozen. Can you just put it in the chat if you can still hear me, actually? It would be, okay, great, I'll keep talking then. The shield, BP, I'm assuming used to stand for British Petroleum. It used to be a shield, a green shield with yellow incorporated into it. And not so long ago, they redesigned their logo. And I'm just going to stop sharing my PowerPoint. Charlotte, you're saying you can see the presentation, can you? Oh, okay. Well, I can't, but good for you. Yeah, the BP badge. They redesigned it. They spent a lot of money, and what does it look like? It looks like a flower, and it's green and yellow. And the idea was to subconsciously make people think that they are environmentally friendly. And they didn't just do that. They had other big kind of publicity campaigns about working to restore coral reefs or whatever. But at the end of the day, they are a petrol company, an oil company, and they're extremely damaging to the environment. In about the year, I can't remember the year exactly, but about 2011, 2012, they had a huge oil spill in Louisiana. Well, not actually in Louisiana, it was on the offshore. And but the oil washed up on the shore of Louisiana, causing huge damage to wildlife. And it's, I mean, that was a mistake. They didn't mean to do it. But the fact of the matter is, oil companies do cause damage to the environment. They will have oil leaks. It's inevitable. And they will cause huge damage to the environment. And even if they don't, of course, what do you do with the oil? You refine it and turn it into petrol, and that will have a problem with fossil, it's burning a fossil fuel and polluting the environment. And of course, then once it's turned into petrol, we just burn it in our cars, damaging the environment. So what they've done is they've taken a kind of environmental movement that's popular, and they've tried to recuperate it into a corporate logo. Now I'm going to struggle to carry on with this lecture if I can't see my slides. So I think I'm going to have to stop presenting and load it again. Bear with me. This shouldn't take long. It's taken a long time this morning. So that's recuperation, right? Taking something basically they're thinking for corporate reasons, at least in my examples. Okay, I'm back to the Che Guevara t-shirt and the BP logo now on my screen. Can you see that again? Anybody? Brilliant. Okay. Now this is an art activist group called Liberate Tate. And what they've done is, this is an excellent example of détournement. So BP have recuperated the environmental movement into a logo that looks like a flower, but now an art activist group have détourned their logo by putting it on a tube of oil paint and squeezing out this sticky oil onto the floor of the Tate Gallery. Why did they do that? Well, BP sponsored the Tate. The Tate had a statement saying they were committed to environmental action, protecting the environment, but they were taking money from BP, and BP were putting their name all over the Tate, sponsoring events. And some art activists felt that this was incongruous with Tate's statement that they cared about the environment. And they wanted to stop Tate taking sponsorship money from BP that were exactly at this time, gushing oil all over the coast of Louisiana. So they did a series of actions, including like tarring and feathering and occupying the Tate Gallery. But this one, I think, kind of sums up how they are détourning BP's corporate message. In fact, we can look at the fact that BP sponsored the Tate Gallery is another attempt of them to recuperate the cultural capital of arts institutions. In other words, in more plain English, they think arty people care about the environment, artists are pretty cool. Let's get them on our side by sponsoring the arts so that they will be less critical of BP. They won't put on an exhibition that's critical of BP at the Tate because we're paying for the Tate. They can recuperate the radical potential of the Tate Gallery and of artists generally and art audiences. People will subconsciously think, oh no, BP are all right. They've got that nice flowery logo that I always see in the Tate Gallery. They support the arts, and they've got that advert on TV about protecting the coral reef. That's their attempt, and Liberate Tate's attempt is to expose that and subvert it. That's what the situationists call détournement. Here's another example that's absolutely awesome from the 1970s, I think. And this is a real advert for a Fiat, and you should read it probably with Jeremy Clarkson's accent. If it were a lady, it would get its bottom pinched. It's the sort of thing that you used to hear on Top Gear, I swear, much more recently than the 70s. And someone's graffitied on it, as you can see, if this lady was a car, she'd run you down. That's another form of détournement. The advert is trying to sell cars by appealing to the fact that maybe if you're a man, if you buy this car, you'll have a sexy car and girls will like you, so buy our car. And the graffiti is pointing out that the advert is sexist. So it's bringing a feminist agenda onto the streets, where previously Fiat has put a sexist agenda. I've got a video here. Cool. It's we're going to watch it. It's 3 minutes long. It's a project called Brandalism from 2012. It's self-explanatory, really, in the video, but I see it very much as a contemporary form of détournement. So, if I remember rightly, you might have to push play on your video. I don't know. I'm going to push play on mine now, and in 3 minutes' time, it's going to stop, and I'm going to start talking again, and we'll move on to the next slide. So you should push play now as well. I've got a message saying someone else took control of my presentation, and now it's closed it. So we'll try again. Okay, I'm back on slide 22. The video is still loading. I'm going to push play now. Let's see if we can get through this without someone's presentation.
Do you know what I'm not feeling great about this spot, you know? It's unsteady ground, it's high. We're doing it, yeah?
28 different artists, 8 different countries, 36 billboards in 5 days. So what we're doing here is a Brandalism exercise. What is Brandalism? Brandalism is, well, it's vandalism, but again, brand.
It's a unified response. You know, we've got street artists, illustrators, graffiti writers, political artists.
So what would you say to anyone who says you're just vandals?
It's vandals. I'll say, yeah, we're vandals, but doing it for a good point.
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a phone call to my manager just to see if we can know about it, and then we'll put it on this side.
So what for that? This is the public realm, though. You know, and like if you watch TV, you read a newspaper, a magazine, you know you're going to come across advertisements. You can flip them over. You can choose whether you engage with them. But out here, who's asked who? There's been no referendums. There's no democratic control. These guys have got money. So they put their messages up. So we're just taking their messages out, really. Just to level the playing field a bit.
Much rather see that than I would see that. Well, that is just quite a shit lark for a start. And this actually has a meaning. Yeah, it makes people think. Yeah. Rather than make people not think. Yeah.
And then when the riots panel came out and said aggressive marketing of consumer goods, including sportswear, was partly responsible for the cause behind the riots. It's quite interesting to hear that come out of the government's own panel.
What do you reckon of it?
It doesn't tell me what it's the advertisement's for.
It's not really an advert, though. It's more of a kind of statement, rather. So
Well, even a statement. I mean, it's not making any kind of statement. No, it doesn't do it for me, unfortunately.
What are you doing again today? Doing a little piece about the Olympics, about curtailment and civil liberties, and increasing police powers around the Olympics.
Everyone's a piece of the Olympic action,
yeah. So we do need to put them in the 20 to 30 grand fine if it's not on the special official sponsors. So we're going to get some up with these converts from that.
So that was Brandalism. Over 30 billboards across 5 cities in 5 days. Wasn't the first time this has been done. This down there.
I sang on the radio once.
Did you? What did you say?
And it made an impact.
Go on.
It really. The habits come, but faint to get your office right. And listen, I can't sing,
Okay, guys. If you're still watching it, you should stop, probably. You can find it online. Now, the thing that's mind-blowing about that is that what they were doing was mainly illegal, and yet they got funding from the Arts Council of England, and it was part of Channel 4's Random Acts that made the film for it. Ah, I've just seen someone said I was creating an echo. Yeah, sorry about that. I should have turned my mic off when I was watching the video. Now, what happened before the Olympics? The year before were the August riots all across the country. Do you remember those? Some of you might be a bit young there, like 9 years ago, but there were riots, really serious riots in London, and then they spread across England. Here's a quotation from the Riots Commission. The advertising industry, they said, creates pressure when they manipulate our needs and desires. Pressure to have the latest gear, clothes and phones. This pressure erupted when kids took to the streets across the country to claim what they had been told they needed. We're lab rats for ad execs who exploit our fears and insecurities through consumerism. I'm a human being, not a consumer. This is now an artist I'm quoting from. So by taking these billboards, we're taking these spaces back. If Sao Paulo in Brazil can ban all outdoor advertising, so can we. It's an interesting thing, because you think like putting up a billboard is legal if you pay for it, if you've got the money. If you don't have the money, like the whole community, they can't put something up. And if you do, it's called graffiti or illegal fly posting. But you can't not see an advert like a billboard. Once it's up, you have to look at it, even if you don't want to. I was going to say something else. What was I going to say? Yeah, I think this is, I mean, although it's a modern project, it really sums up what the Situationists meant by détournement. Right, we're running over. I'm going to have to be quick through this, but that's that bit over. I mean, we could just say that's a lecture on constructing situations and détournement, and that's finished. But I wanted to link it to another art movement and the notion of sculpting a new society. This is a lovely quote here by a really famous artist called Joseph Beuys. He says, "Only on condition of a radical widening of definition will it be possible for art and activities related to art to provide evidence that art is now the only evolutionary revolutionary power. Only art is capable of dismantling the repressive effects of a senile social system that continues to totter along the death line, to dismantle in order to build a social organism as a work of art." What does he mean by that? He developed the notion of a social sculpture or sculpting society. Social sculpture was a kind of artwork that takes place in the social realm, an artwork that requires social engagement, the participation of its audience, and for Beuys, the concept was infused with both political intent and spiritual values. Spectators became participants, he believed. This was a catalyst for the social sculpture that would lead to the transformation of society through the release of popular creativity. So for Beuys, the role of the artist was not to function politically in any organisational sense, but to lead by the example of his or her art. But these kinds of leading by example tactics that Beuys advocates are necessarily undemocratic. They're not really participatory in the fullest sense, because he wants to lead. This makes them methodologically incongruous with Beuys's other aim, which is to transform Western culture into a more peaceful, democratic and creative system. What did Beuys do then? Well, he did lectures. He travelled around meeting with people and talking to them. What you've got to get in your head is it's the exact opposite of saying, I'm going to take images of everyday life and put them in an art gallery. It's not about everyday life, which, like the Situationists, he's seeing as boring, but it's about creating how you live your life. Everything that you do, if you do it with an aesthetic awareness, if you deeply care about your environment, food that you eat, if everyone does that and works together to create a new society, or to sculpt a new society, as he said, that would be beautiful and that would transcend art. One thing he did was, in 1982, for the famous Documenta art festival, which happens every 5 years, he proposed to plant 7,000 oak trees. Each one is paired with a stone made from basalt. There's a big pile of stones, 7,000 stones, and when he plants trees, starting here at Kassel in Documenta in Germany, but then moving around the world, every time one's planted, the stone's removed. So the pile shrinks every time a tree is planted. The project can be seen locally as a gesture towards green urban renewal. It took 5 years to complete. It spread to other cities all around the world. A contemporary artist that I think somehow works like that is Pedro Reyes, Mexican artist. He made this project called Palas por Pistolas, which translates as spades for pistols, or spades for guns. So it's a gun amnesty, getting gangs to hand in guns, melting them down, turning them into shovels, and then using the shovels to plant trees so that you make something beautiful out of, a machine that's designed to kill. He also set up the Free International University. It was supposed to be a school outside the academic system, and it admitted all students. There were no entry requirements. It was founded as an organisational place of research, work and communication to ponder the future of society. Its goals, well, as a free university, it was intended to supplement the state's educational system while at the same time campaigning for legal equality with that system. One of the most pressing issues for the Free International University for creativity and for interdisciplinary research was how to help raise the capacity of all individuals to be creative beings by advocating the cross-pollination of ideas across disciplines. So not just studying geography and someone else studying English, but trying to work across them all, as well as trying to formulate the concepts of individual freedom at the same time, to be able to shape social forms through the transformation of resources. The idea of the Free International University was revisited and taken further by various groups of people, including Rainer Rappmann under the FIU, Free International University Verlag publishers, in Amsterdam, Gelsenkirchen, Hamburg, and Munich, which were, all of these kind of versions of the university were begun by students of Joseph Beuys. They also include the organisation of Mehr Demokratie and an omnibus for direct democracy. So setting up institutions where people can come together regardless of qualifications or money to discuss ideas across disciplines for how to make the world and society better. Beuys truly believed in universal human creativity and art's revolutionary potential to change society. He was heavily influenced by the philosophy and pedagogy of Rudolf Steiner, as in Steiner schools. For example, a major part of Beuys' conception of social sculpture is Steiner's concept of social threefolding. Steiner believed it was socially destructive when one of his three spheres, which were economics, politics, and culture, he believed it was socially destructive when one of them attempts to dominate the others. For example, religious domination means a cultural impulse dominates the economy and politics. Unregulated and socially irresponsible varieties of capitalism allow economic interests to dominate politics and culture. And state socialism, by which he means the Soviet Union, means political agendas dominate culture and the economy. Steiner schools, also called Waldorf schools, attempt to create a balance between these three spheres and create social engagement, among other things. Did anyone go to a Steiner school? Over the years, I've taught quite a few people that have been to Steiner schools. Okay, no one went to a Steiner school, so you can all rest assured that everything I've said is definitely 100% accurate about Steiner. There was a free university in South Africa between 1977 and 1985. The University of the Trees takes forward the social sculptural strategies of Joseph Beuys and embeds them within an expanded conception of art. Especially the awakened relationship to nature and the emphasis on ecological matters that he started with 7,000 Oaks. And one of the people that worked with Beuys there is Professor Shelley Sachs, and she now works at Oxford Brookes University and has set up a centre for social sculpture there. We're coming to the end. Here you can see then, kind of expanding on Steiner really, Beuys looks to incorporate three elements equally. Pedagogy. Pedagogy is just a posh word for theory of sort of educational theory of teaching. Actually, if you want to be really clever, you can correct people and say, no, it isn't. It's a theory of how to teach children. The peda prefix is the same as like paedophile or any of those kinds of things. Pediatrics, or all of that means children. The educational theory of teaching adults is andragogy, but very few people know that. So anyway, education, politics, and arts coming together. He said, I'm quoting from Professor Sachs, every human being is an artist, a freedom being, called to participate in transforming and reshaping the conditions, thinking, and structures that shape and inform our lives. What does he mean by that? Well, he actually, he didn't quite say that. He said every human being is potentially an artist. He thinks that we all have creativity. Picasso said that as well, didn't he? All children make art. All children are artists. The difficulty is how to remain being an artist. But he thinks that creativity is in all of us and that we can all use it to play a part to make the world better.